Welcome to Urban Ed Voyage, the educational podcast that invites you to embark on a transformative journey into innovative education within urban schools. Whether you're passionate about education, an advocate for innovative approaches in urban schools, or simply curious about the possibilities of cutting-edge learning in urban settings, Urban Ed Voyage is your gateway to understanding the phenomena of innovative education. Join us on this enriching journey and let your imagination be drawn to the extraordinary possibilities of modern learning in urban environments. This week's guest is Maywood Center for Enriched Studies Principal Gabriel Duran. I had the pleasure of meeting Gabriel 7 years ago when he was selected as the first principal of Mesas. Gabriel's passion and commitment to creating a rigorous, culturally relevant learning space for our Southeast Los Angeles scholars is unmatched. 6 years later, Gabriel and I co-facilitated a climate and culture workshop for LAUSD principals. It was a smashing success. Gabriel was an obvious choice to be the first guest on the Magnet Minds podcast. We are fortunate to have with us today Maywood Center for Enriched Studies Principal Gabriel Duran. Gabriel, how are you feeling today?
I'm feeling good and nervous at the same time.
You nervous? No, never.
Yes, believe it or not. You want to make sure you are of service or have some insight.
Okay, well, you give off the perception that you're always in control, so there it is. Okay, so let's begin by maybe you sharing a bit about your background and how you became a principal. Like, what inspired you to pursue a career in education?
So I was a runner in high school, and then I went away to college and I came back.
Hold on for a second, like a runner track, right?
Like
not a runaway.
No, not a runner.
Okay, just want to be clear.
No, I was a cross country and a track runner. I was a miler, and I was actually pretty good. Mm-hmm. And then eventually I came back home and just needed to pick up my studies at the community college, and I found a job with the city of Carson in their Parks and Recreation department. And before you knew it, I was organizing the youth leagues, I was organizing camps, I was coordinating any little special events for students, for kids after school. And one of the things that I found out is that it was fun to organize, but like when you were around the kids, it was a lot more. Mm-hmm. So that's when I changed my major. It's like, hey, maybe I want to be a teacher. Maybe I don't want to be a business person. And so the introduction to just being able to organize an event, a league, and then seeing the joy of kids was powerful. But I found that the interaction was even more. And that's what led me to change to a liberal arts major and eventually start teaching in elementary.
Gotcha. Yeah, a lot of principals have similar experiences. I was a youth camp counselor. That was my first experience with organizing and working with students. So in my experience as executive director, I've learned that successful magnet programs have both a positive climate and a positive school culture. I mean, you were fortunate enough to open up your own school and build your staff. Hiring a staff was the easy part. Establishing a positive school culture is not. How were you intentional in building relationships and developing systems that led to Mesas' positive school culture?
Yes, I thought a lot about this question, and I think it's interesting that a lot of people talk about being fortunate to open up and select your staff as being the easy part, but actually that was the hardest part. We had 45 spots, teaching positions, and we had over 100 applicants. So the difficult part was, one, not dismissing any applicant. Two is interviewing them and filtering out who would be the one. And so that was time consuming, but eventually, led to being able to select a few teachers, here and there, key people. Because what happens is when you first open up a school, you don't have a staff. It's just you.
Right.
Nobody comes along until you actually open up. And so just being able to, do the background on the staff, selecting people that were coming from other magnets, the reason why they were coming to other magnets, but more importantly, I had to fight against Maywood, because there is Maywood Academy. And so it's like, wait, how can you turn Maywood Academy into a magnet? And the answer is no, this is a new campus.
Right.
And so when people came along and they started to see, the first question was always like, what's the CES? And so, as the Center for Enriched Studies, how are you different than a, math and science or business major, focus? So that's where a lot of the work began as far as establishing that culture of the school, of thinking of it as like, we are going to offer as many electives as possible. And so once people bought into that, is like, what other things besides your single subject credential can you add? You're an amateur photographer, and could you teach an elective of photography? So finding those key people with key talents was critical. And I think it's ironic, we were just talking about our teacher who raps about, the emergency drills and makes rap videos with the students about school. And that's a science teacher who brings the elective of, being able to integrate the audiovisual arts into our program. As far as culture goes, I think culture is the heart of the school community. And it begins with everyone agreeing on what your mission and vision is. Once you have that mission and vision, for us, it was more like, what are the core values? So, the district has this thing about be respectful, be responsible, things like that. So we said, okay, let's add the scholarly to it. And could we live with those values and not make it about rules? And I think that once we focus on the mission and vision, and then we have those core values of being safe, responsible, respectful, and scholarly, we can begin the process of, like, what is the school going to look like? But for me, it was more about, how can I do this every week to build the team? But then how can I do activities that will be done with staff that then can carry over to the classroom? And that's the hard part. Because whatever you celebrate with your teachers, you want your teachers to celebrate with the kids. So if one of them was about making a difference, the weekly difference award, we honor a teacher, we honor a classified staff member, and then we wanted them to do the same thing in the classroom. So making that a part of your weekly process was, difficult, challenging, but I think that was what led to us building the culture that we have. Not having 25 rules, but having 4 core values. Going back to the mission and vision, and of course, recognizing that Appreciation Week is not just when it calls for, but it's an ongoing basis.
Yeah, that mission and vision statement is so important, so foundational. And I think a lot of principals, they don't consider that. Or they're placed at a school that maybe there is no mission and vision, and then they're trying to build a culture, but there's no basis for it. So it's really important that principals do really truly explore the whole mission and vision.
You're absolutely right. I think, and that's the one thing, is that as a new school, you had to repeat that mission vision. And now what I think about is, what could a new administrator, a new school site do? And for us, it's about, our vision is about having that intellectually safe environment. It sounds very like, oh, that's what's so hard about it. But what does it look like when it's in action? So I think that as a new administrator or anybody who takes over something that was already there, it's really about understanding that how do you add to and make that public on an ongoing basis, not with just your staff, but with the entire community, including parents.
But you've mentioned 3 different stakeholders, which I think is very important. It's like, in the district, we like to talk about triple tracking. That's kind of what you're doing with your teachers, with your students, and then with your community, making sure the same message is out to all 3 different stakeholders, and that you're modeling appropriate behaviors and with all 3 expectations. So thank you for that. So Mesas has already gained a strong reputation in such a short time. There are well over 3 times the number of students on the waiting list and the spots available. In your words, what makes Mesas' program successful?
I think that the key is always, we all have a single plan for student achievement, the SPSA. And then, of course, we have, at the secondary and now at the middle school as well, the WASC accreditation. And then, of course, you have all these other different things. So one of the things that we focus on, as an example, is when the Board of Education passed a board resolution that said that by 2025, every one of our schools would have a computer science education for all their students. So we know that that's coming. So then we look at, okay, what's our WASC accreditation say that we have to do, the next time they come around, or mid-year cycle. But then we look at our SPSA, right? And then how does this idea of every kid having computer science fit in? So rather than just saying, okay, let's offer a course for our middle schoolers because, the board says by 2025 we're supposed to have it, we kind of looked at it long way, long term, in the sense of, okay, how does establishing a computer science pathway lead to the high school level? Because there are classes there are credits for your high school math requirements as well as your science. So one of the things that we did is we established that pathway where all of our sixth graders, they get a class, and it's robotics. We introduce them to robotics, and we use that as an entryway, which leads to seventh grade computer science discovery. So every single middle schooler gets programmed. They all get the same courses. So that's an easy pathway. Mm-hmm. The thing for us is come eighth grade, we introduce them to programming. So students have that chance to take the programming. And then we lay out, okay, in ninth grade, you're able to take a computer science exploration. You can take that's part of the G requirement. Or you could take the AP computer science principles, which is part of the D requirement for the A through G classes, or the science requirements. So when students see that, they see, okay, this would be an option for me. The thing is, now you write it with your technology plan and say, how do I incorporate this? And then you go back to your SPSA and say, okay, what is it in my SPSA says that I have to do with math? So you kind of align it, and then you look at your WASC accreditation and says, okay, WASC is asking for us to have these electives, these pathways. So that's a way in which we can, reach out to our student body. I use that as an example because anytime that you add something to your program, you have to look at it as how does it fit into what you already have as a school plan. So if AVID, our third year, we looked into AVID because we felt that was a group of students that needed, our B, C students. Okay, how did it align to what we already had? And so if it doesn't align, I think you're just doing piecemeal, mm-hmm. which leads to, disconnect, mm-hmm. Which leads to nothing that it builds upon it.
Right.
Because in order for us to be able to have an AVID program, a computer science pathway, an art, visual, and arts performance, pathway, you need to lay out what's going to happen in each of the grade levels. Now, granted, I have the benefit of having middle school and high school, but the thing about it is, if I'm just at a middle school magnet, I can say, okay, how does it build to where my students might feed into? So that's the success. The success is really about students knowing what they can have, then they talk to their friends. And then, believe it or not, it's really social media.
It sounds like you guys have thought long and hard about the development of your own strategic plan that sets goals for the students and for the years to come. And that just reminded me a lot of Superintendent Carvalho and the strategic plan within LAUSD, mm-hmm. is that this is what we're about. This is who we are. These are our core values, and everything should branch from that. And your foundational documents are your single plan for SPSA, and also when you looked at the WASC accreditation. So that's your grounding, right?
Correct. Always.
Great. So one of the reasons why I wanted to bring you in here is that I've heard and actually witnessed firsthand that you have taken some unconventional approaches to real issues. So talk to me about one in particular. What is the real Churro story?
That is funny. It's funny that after 7 years, people still remember that Churro story. So the Churro story just comes down to is in the beginning, it was difficult to recruit students. Part of it was the middle schoolers. Many parents were apprehensive in our community. Maywood, Southeast LA, Maywood, Cudahy, Hunter Park, Southgate, the city of Bell. And the idea was how can you put middle schoolers with the high schoolers? They're going to shower together. They're going to be bullied. They're going to all of this. So, what we produced is beautiful handouts that explain how we were going to, do all the safety precautions and what we were going to offer. The Churro story is simply I wanted to speak at the local church, and they did not let me. They told me I could stand outside and pass out flyers, but I could not speak to the church members. So one day I was there passing out my flyers, and so to my left was somebody selling champurrado and hot chocolate, and on the other side somebody's selling churros. And I thought, how ironic, you can get your drink, your magnet application, and then get a churro while you're at it. So when we finally did accept our students, when we brought the first group of students, we each gave them a churro. It's kind of symbolic of we're grateful you were here. Which kind of leads me back to, some things that we always have to do as far as feeding our staff and our students. But that the real aspect of this is the unconventional approach. It's not so much unconventional, but knowing what talking to students. So let me give you an example. If you start a chess club, the first thing we ask of you is, get your membership going, get it sanctioned and everything by ASB, and then create an Instagram account. So it's always Mace's, chess club, Mace's, Interact, Mace's, whatever the club is. Because what we want is we want the students to learn to promote themselves. We cannot make, they don't look at flyers. Parents look at flyers, but parents don't. And it's those social Instagram postings that allows students to say, oh, I did not know that they had this. So every sports team has one, every club has one, and it's part of them to be officially sanctioned. And that's really the real churro. They themselves promote each other, which when we do Club Rush, the first thing people do is like scan this QR code and you can see what are the things that we've done in the past.
Oh, wow. That sounds like you're developing agency within your students.
Yes, absolutely. And the interesting part about it is that one time I had a student that came up to me and said, because the official Instagram account of the school is ran by us, the adults, the magnet coordinator, myself, and one student just said, can you guys start to use Canva? Canva has a lot better flyers. And we're like, what? What do you mean? And so eventually we made him a little partner and said, hey, can you post something? Because what we realized is that where we went top down as far as our information, they would go sideways, they would add little bubbles, they add little things that are more creative. So yes, we do make it about them, and once in a while we will make them as guests because they think that the official school Instagram is not as exciting as theirs.
Yeah, of course it's not, because this is the world we live in.
Yes.
Where we rely on our students to help us become more creative. Right?
Yes.
So what are the most significant challenges you face as a school principal, and how do you address them?
So I think, behavior is always an issue, right? And I think that, I mentioned going back to the core values of when a student misbehaves in class. Our school does not have a dean of discipline. So instead of us having a dean, we have an extra, we use those monies to pay for a counselor. So instead of having 3 counselors, we have 4. And so now when a student misbehaves, a student is having some sort of issue in the classroom, the first referral is to their counselor. And the counselor is supposed to guide, supposed to assist. Of course, if they do something that is illegal, something that is unsafe, then one of the 3 administrators has to address it. We have to document. We have to do the district policy and procedures in regards to that. I think the matrix that the district has as to what falls category 1, 2, or 3 kind of issue is critical. And we make that public to all of our students. We make it to all of our parents. When a parent comes in and something happens, that's what we do. That's always the biggest issue. The vaping, the harassments, that kind of deal. But by far the biggest challenge as a principal is balancing my time that requires me to submit the compliance documentation, all the mandates that we have to have on a monthly basis, but more importantly, getting into the classroom and supervising instruction. Every Tuesday we have to lead some sort of professional development. We're supposed to support something. Well, you can't just go and do it with the module. You have to actually have some data yourself, observations that you've done. That's hard. But that's probably the hardest part, is being able to get into a classroom continuously, daily, if not weekly, because that's really where the heart of the school is at.
Right. It's almost like you have to block off time just to go into the classrooms.
Right. And the thing about the blocking of the time is oftentimes when a parent shows up with an urgent matter or student.
They don't get it.
They don't, and you have to stop and do that. Correct.
So I want to go back to the dean thing.
Yes.
And so how long have you guys gone without a dean?
From day one.
From day one?
From day one.
And how did that come about?
Well, it came about, part of my experience, having worked in operations, is that oftentimes whenever I was asked to go to a school to assist with an irate parent about a student who had done something inappropriate and now needed to face discipline, oftentimes I would ask the parent, so when the school contacted you, who contacted you and what was the steps? And they would always say, no one contacted me. They just told me about what he did now. So it was more like you could see things building up, but they had not been that parent contact. And of course, the idea was, as the more I saw it and more I dealt with deans at the schools, is like deans always had the punishment that was going to be, put in place, whatever that may have been. And I kept thinking of the tier levels of intervention that we talk about when we're dealing with behaviors. So it seemed like there was never the tier levels. It was never happening. But counselors did. And so that's where it came about. So when we sat down and we, developed, who was going to handle what and whose jobs, duties it was, that was the one thing is we will not have a dean. Of course, could you go in and eliminate a dean position from a school now? The answer is that'd be an interesting question and problem to have.
Right, because I was curious to know if some of your peers have eliminated their dean.
Not that I know of, but it's also not something that I go around telling people because they always say, well, that's not a good idea because then that you're dealing with all the behavior problems. And the answer is yes. The responsibility does fall on an admin to deal with those category 1 or 2s that require us to go above it.
Right. It's just, but you have a different approach.
Correct.
Your approach is more of just building the student up rather than just breaking them down by just giving them pure punishment.
Correct. There is no punishment. Actually, it's more of a reflection, and that reflection happens with their counselors.
That sounds fantastic. Is there an inspiring student or staff story you would like to share with us, or can you describe any memorable success stories or achievements from your time as a principal that made a significant impact on the school community?
Yes. This young lady, she's it's a story of a young lady who was very good about talking about social media and the importance of online safety and all of this stuff. And so part of her when she was in 11th grade, she came to us with the idea that during digital citizenship, could digital citizenship be a year-long project? And so we're like, sure. What would that look like? What I did not realize is that through the different classes and clubs, there was a club called Girls Who Code. And so Girls Who Code is essentially a group of young ladies who come together to learn how to code. It's an organization, Girls Who Code. What happened is that she had attended a little symposium, and there that idea just clicked in her head. And this is a young girl who would never even come up to you and say, hey, I want to do something. But because she went on this field trip with this club, Girls Who Code, she came back and wanted to take it on. And I got to tell you, eventually, she was, part of the district's digital citizenship promotion because of what she had done all year long. And so she created a website where in an Instagram account where it was about posting good stuff, good feeling motivational stuff. And before you knew it, it wasn't just our community. She had people from all over the country and some from out of the from throughout the world. And essentially, it was more about, hey, post something positive. And so she took it upon herself, and which has led her to be a computer science major at USC now.
That's great.
But the thing about it is it was simply a club that exposed her to something, and then she came back, and it was the teachers who said, yes, let's do this. It was the support of the leadership that said, yes, let's do this. This is good. So something that we do once a year in October became something that we did weekly, monthly. And you can see the difference in our postings of what our kids do in relation to digital citizenship.
Oh, that's great. Your school is a full inclusion school, correct?
Yes.
Okay, can you talk a little bit about how that decision was made to become a full inclusion school? And then part B to that is, what advice or recommendations would you give to any other principal who's considering it?
Right. Well, first of all, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work, and it requires for you to really explain yourself to the special ed department and the staff as to how it's going to be. Full inclusion requires team teaching, which requires a lot of trust.
I'm sorry, I need to talk about what inclusion means.
Sure.
So inclusion means that you do not have any special day programs.
We do not have any special day classes.
Every student with an IEP is in, and for lack of a better phrase, a regular classroom.
Correct.
Okay, so continue.
Full-time.
Full-time.
So yes, so what happens is the vast majority of our students fall into the RSP, and some of the special day class in the sense of behavioral problems. Out of the 8 students that we have, I can tell you like 5 of them have, what they call one-on-ones. Mm-hmm. Some of them that's with them because of safety or reasons that are called for. So I think the most important part with full inclusion is the fact that resource students, students with autism, anything that is kind of socially awkward, they have the capability. They have demonstrated the capability to do the work. It's just not at the pace in which we may be requiring others to do. So part of this is going back and saying to whenever a parent gets accepted and they have an IEP, and of course we don't discriminate or say no you can't because you have. The first thing we do is we have to sit down and do the IEP, the transition IEP, to see what the student's individual education plan calls for. We do not turn them away. Simply, we explain to the parents that they will be in their regular math class, regular history class, everything is the same. However, we do offer a lab time where the resource teacher will pull that student aside and work in a much smaller setting. But the vast majority of the day is spent with the regular classmates. The interesting part about it is we track how those students do. We look at their attendance. We look at their 5-week report. They have what they call a passport. And in the passport, it has what their IEP goals are and what their benchmark is for that reporting period. So that was the key in giving that to our resource teachers. This is what you're going to do. You're going to have to create this with the student, and then you have to pass this on to the teacher in which they go in. So a regular ed teacher is never surprised by what it is that this child needs, because the IEP is a legal document that is very lengthy. So we essentially create a pamphlet of each student's profile. We call it the student's IEP passport. And the student knows you got to give this to your teacher and why you give it to them. And again, these are very highly functioning students. And then our resource teachers are students who definitely need a lot of modifications. But the teacher goes into the classroom when the student gets service, and they make it a point to not be around that student, but rather just support in general. So they always see the second teacher in the classroom. And that requires time that's allocated from our school plan to provide for some time for the teacher in the regular ed and special ed class to meet. Mm-hmm. So you have to build that in. Otherwise, it doesn't work. And then last but not least is the parent. The parent has to buy in. In the entire time that I've been there, I can tell you it's been like 5 students whose parents said, this doesn't work. They need to be in a full inclusion class.
Only 5?
Only 5. And if you look at the achievement, it's up there. It's not like it's any different than other students, but they do have an IEP.
That's encouraging, the only 5, because that tells me that parents want their children and to access as many classes and clubs and activities as their non-special ed peers.
And I think the key here is, Keith, is the fact that the students don't feel like they're any different. Because other kids go to labs for other things. They go to their science lab, they go to this other lab. So it's not like, I have a lab and therefore there's no letter attached to them that says you're special needs.
That letter was attached to them back when we were growing up.
Correct. Yes.
We knew all the kids who were special ed. They were in the back, and then the two schools never crossed.
Correct.
Okay. So what advice do you have for aspiring educators who may be considering a career in school administration or a leadership role?
My advice, first of all, is you cannot be in the office. You have to be out there with the students. The students are you don't need to wait for a survey to find out what's going on at the school. You have to find a way to manage your time to do the paperwork when the students are not there, or before school begins, or right after school. My advice is simply that. My advice is you got to always have a book in your back pocket that is inspirational, because it can be very draining on you. And the more that you hear the negativity, the more you feel as though you're digging a bigger hole. The reality is, that book, who fills your bucket, is critical. You have to have people around you that are going to keep it real, but also are going to say, hey, we're doing a good job. So whenever we have our leadership team meetings on Mondays, the first thing everybody has to share is not what they're overwhelmed with that week. They have to share with us something that is positive in what they're working on, so that others can hear it. And then that sets the content for all the other things that they need to do.
Okay, great. So we're running out of time, and something that we like to do is to ask 3 quick questions, which we call a speed round.
Go for it.
You ready?
Yes.
What is one book that all educators should read?
Definitely, if you don't feed the teachers, they'll eat the students. This is a great book for administrators because it has nothing to do with education. It has to do with setting up your support for your staff. And it comes down to how can you be helpful and reflective when they come up to you with issues that you may feel as though they may be insignificant, that they are of big importance to them. So the idea is, what can I take off their plate right now that would make them feel as though I just handed them a meal? But more importantly, what are you doing to reflect on what they're asking for you? So you have to feed them. And a teacher being hungry is simply sometimes they just need a pat on the back.
Great. What do you do for self-care?
So I cycle. I've been fortunate enough to be able to, ride my bike 14 miles at least 2 times a week from my home in Long Beach to my work. It just requires me to bring in my clothes. But what's interesting is at the end of the day, 5 o'clock, I know I have to leave. And that's the thing right there, Keith, is, we talk about self-care, right? But I know that whenever I ride my bike, I have to leave by 5 o'clock or it's going to get dark.
Right.
And then I realize every day I could leave at 5 o'clock, but I don't because I have my car. So that's a form of self-care because you're forced to do that, and you need to force yourself to have time where you do something that's good for you, whatever that may be.
Great. And last question, what inspirational quote do you live by?
I live by the quote, and it's in Spanish because my dad is the one that always told us about it. And it simply says, siempre hay que querer ser el mejor, pero nunca creerse el mejor. Translated, it means you must always strive to be the best, but never believe you are the best.
Gabriel, I appreciate you sharing your insights and what you have learned and your experience. I believe our audience is a bit smarter today, so thank you for your time.
No, thank you for having this opportunity to share what I've learned.
Okay. Gabriel Duran.
Thank you.